So, everyone, you can see this tweet here by Mr. Glenn Greenwald. Hillary is inadvertently acknowledging the real U.S. objective, not to protect Ukraine, but sacrifice it by turning it into another Afghanistan or Syria to prolong fighting and thus drain Russia. All right, I'll ignore that second sentence for now, but let's test his thesis here. Let's see if she's right, if he's right, rather. This is Hillary Clinton on MSNBC.
But remember, the Russians invaded Afghanistan back in 1980. And although no country went in, they certainly had a lot of countries supplying arms and advice and even some advisors to those who were recruited to fight Russia. It didn't end well for the Russians. There were other unintended consequences, as we know. But the fact is that a very...
Let me pause it there. There were other unintended consequences, as we know. Just so you know, one of those unintended consequences she's talking about is, 9/11.
Yeah. The creation of the Taliban.
Right. The creation of the Taliban.
The training of Osama bin Laden.
Right, exactly. That was what, she just kind of glosses over that. She doesn't go into detail about that, obviously.
Yeah. We had a little blowback. You always get a little blowback.
Yeah, there's a little, recoil there.
Yeah, exactly. What are you going to do?
Motivated and then funded and armed insurgency basically drove the Russians out of Afghanistan. Obviously, the similarities are not ones that you should bank on, because the terrain, the development in urban areas, et cetera, is so different. But I think that is the model that people are now looking toward. And if there can be sufficient armaments that get in, and they should be able to get in along some of the borders between other nations and Ukraine, and keep the Ukrainian, both their military and their citizen volunteer soldiers supplied, that can continue to stymie Russia. Now, let's be clear that Russia has overwhelming military force. But of course, they did in Afghanistan as well. They also brought a lot of air power to Syria. It took years to finally defeat Syria. In terms of the insurgencies, the democratic forces, as well as others who battled the Russians, the Syrians, and the Iranians. So if you're fighting for your homeland, you're fighting for your family.
Fundamentalists, ISIS, other unsavory characters that we allied with.
Right, the insurgents.
The freedom-loving ISIS opposition.
Yeah.
You're fighting for your ideals. That's far more powerful than sending in these poor, young Russian soldiers who didn't even know where they were going.
That's why we lost the Afghanistan war, because we were the poor, young Russian soldiers going in and fighting a war we didn't really know why was our business. And the people there were, defending their homeland.
Until they crossed the border and people were screaming at them and they realized they were in Ukraine. So I think we have to watch this carefully. We have to provide sufficient military armaments for the Ukraine military and volunteers. And we have to keep tightening the screws.
Okay, let's check Mr. Greenwald's statement. The real U.S. objective, not to protect Ukraine, but sacrifice it by turning it into another Afghanistan or Syria to prolong fighting and thus drain Russia. The sacrifice part is a bit subjective, but everything else seems spot on. What she's saying there is utterly monstrous. What she is saying there is we want this war to go on for a very long time. Yeah, she's advocating perpetual violence in order to what? Starve Russia, exhaust Russia, deplete Russia's military might, will, capability. She's advocating there for endless war. Virtually. I mean, that's basically what she's saying there. And,
well, there's another part of that interview where she talks about how we need to stop the people who are giving aid and comfort within our own country to Vladimir Putin, who are talking about how smart he is. Now, this was a genius move because that's all going on state media. So, you just this is where I'm really flabbergasted that Putin did this. Doesn't he realize he empowered every fucking hawkish asshole like Hillary Clinton by doing this? Like he just elevated these people beyond their wildest dreams.
Well, look,
all the neocons, all the war hawks, all the Russia gators.
Well, sure thing, but all these people are in luck. All these people are in luck right now because anyone who absorbs that and takes that seriously and says, yes, we must continue to fund and arm the Ukrainian resistance in order to exhaust Russia and do whatever it takes. She's even saying she doesn't expect Ukraine to win the war. She's saying we can make this drag out in order to, as Mr. Greenwald put it, drain Russia. Now, I have some good news for anybody who thinks that this is a fight worth fighting. Very good news. I think you'll be very interested to hear this. I think Bill Kristol, David Frum, Jennifer Rubin, Rachel Maddow, all these people.
I know where you're going with this. I was going to mention it myself.
They'll be very interested to hear this. Ukraine waives visa requirements for foreigners who want to come and fight Russia. Exactly. What that means is that anyone from anywhere in the world who wants to fight and potentially die for Ukraine is welcome to go and fight for Ukraine. That is according to the president's website. Here we have it. Quote, anyone who wants to join the defense of Ukraine, Europe, and the world can come and fight side by side with the Ukrainians against the Russian war criminals. The only exception to that is obviously they won't take people from Russia itself. But anyone else from any other country on earth who believes that the Ukrainian resistance is doing God's work and thinks this is a fight worth fighting and a fight worth dragging out, who thinks that this bloodshed that we're witnessing now is worth it, you are welcome to put your money where your big fucking mouth is and go to Ukraine. They'll get you set up and you'll be fighting the good fight right alongside.
I've even got a slogan for them. Resistance. It's not just a hashtag anymore.
It's not just a pussy hat anymore. It's not, swiping the pussy hats out. Maybe they can have pussy helmets, not just pussy hats, right? Not just the wool, but armored pussy hats.
That'll go over really well with their Ukrainian allies, I'm sure.
You're right, exactly.
So they'll really appreciate that bit of cultural signaling.
Yeah, right, exactly. But that is what we're talking about, and I think like it's amazing the propaganda, how effective war propaganda is. There's no propaganda like war propaganda, right?
No,
President
that's
Zelensky, right? He's the biggest
you really can't even stick
right
your head up when this kind of shit is going on. Not even to make a kind of social justice point. Like, hey, so where were you guys the last several years with the whole genocide in Yemen thing? I didn't see anybody rushing Bitcoin to Yemen.
No, but that's way too advanced. I'm just talking about just very short term, like, Zelensky, is the biggest hero on earth right now because he's the president and he's suiting up, right? I mean, not only do we deify and not only do we sort of celebrate war, but we really deify the warrior. And so the leader who's willing to suit up and fight to the death for his country is looked upon as this great hero. And look, what you have to say is, the more you root for the Ukrainian defense forces, the more you are rooting for this violence to continue. That's what you're rooting for. You're rooting for more war. I think Zelensky should demand meetings and lock himself in a room with whatever Russian officials he has to lock himself up with. Maybe bring a food tester with you just for safety. All right. But strike a goddamn deal. Jeremy Corbyn put out a really good video. He strikes me as a very good and decent guy who's just been smeared by every fucking liar there is. He said, look, wars always end with political solutions. And so why can't we just skip the killing part and go right to the talking part? And that seems to make a lot of sense to me. That seems to me a perspective that takes into account human life and the costs, the just unbelievable cost of war. Because look, Hillary Clinton just said herself, she doesn't expect Ukraine to win in the end. This is about going 15 rounds, right? Now, number one, I was just talking about how everyone on earth is welcome to go and fight for Ukraine. Hey, if every do-gooder in the U.S. and everywhere else in the world actually went and joined forces, maybe they could win. Maybe they could win if they actually got.
I don't know, man. Have you seen the Pussy Hat Brigade? that would be one funny battalion. I'll tell you that.
Well, that I was being a bit facetious with that point, but this next point is actually a very, very serious one, which is that in order to get to a point where Russia backs down, getting to that point is going to require the spilling of unfathomable amounts of blood. Like, you know what's going to have to happen before Russia says, okay, we're just going to call this off? I think you're talking about a lot of people being slaughtered in order for that to happen. And so if you think that's a fight worth fighting, like I said, Ukraine themselves, they said everybody's welcome to come join us.
I think this is more philosophically complicated than you're making out. Putin has made it very clear through his actions, even before they actually cross the border, that he has an objective, and he really doesn't have any intention of negotiating. He wants the government replaced. He definitely wants those eastern provinces, and he basically wants a puppet regime, and he wants an agreement that, you know, Ukraine won't be part of NATO, possibly not part of the EU either, although it looks like that might end up being a fait accompli. And the talks that they had the other day, very much like when the Russians said that their troops were returning back to base, it seemed like just playing for time. It seemed like a distraction, just manipulating the enemy. I don't think they ever had any intention of coming to any kind of agreement. So then it comes down to, you're essentially saying, is it worth it to you to not let Russia take over your country? Which, I mean, that's a question that any country being invaded could ask of itself, or could be asked. I don't think that's a fair standard. You're basically, let's be clear. The Russians want basically the Ukraine to revert to an Eastern Bloc country where they have some puppet regime, some ridiculous farce of being an independent country, when essentially it's a satellite of Russia. That's what they want. And I don't think Putin is going to stop short of that. So when you say, is it worth it to you? You're saying, is it worth it to you to have a nation? Because they're not going to have a nation if they give Putin what he wants. So I think it's complicated now that we've gotten here. I've expressed my views on the history behind this. We never should have gotten here. Ultimately, the blame is with the West, in terms of the chain of events that got us here. But now that we're here, it's not as simple as stand down and give the Russians what they want. Not if they want to continue to have a country.
Well, that's their decision that they're obviously free to make. But I just want everybody to be clear: if you're championing this resistance, you are championing further bloodshed. That's what you're championing. And if you don't,
that's true. And that's a maximalist pacifist argument.
Well, yeah,
I mean, essentially, you're saying you just don't believe in war. You should never defend your country.
I do not. And look, if you want, if you don't want to take,
you should never defend your country.
If you don't want to take not never. I'm not saying never, but I'm saying in this situation,
then you believe in war.
In this situation, if you don't want to take my word for it, okay, I want you to hear this assessment from Richard Haass. Right? Doesn't get any more official than Richard Haass. Right? Here we go. He's talking to Mr. Morning Joe, man.
Richard Haass, president of the Council on Foreign Relations. The ruble has collapsed. Russian markets are closed today because things are going just as badly as we predicted before the war began. You have banks being shut down, interest rates spiking to 20% in Russia, Putin having trouble with its ground war against the Ukrainians. These are all things that we predicted. We predicted before that that he would be isolated, and yet he made the move anyway, which I only bring up all those who predicted this was going to happen just to say the man did what was not in his best interest, not in the best interest of his country, and it was deeply troubling then, more troubling now that he seems to talk about nuclear weapons every 2 or 3 days when things don't break the way he wants them to break. Give us some insight.
Well, you're right. He is isolated. He also is what I would describe as a serial underestimator. He was of the United States at the beginning of this crisis, clearly was of Germany and Europe, clearly was of Ukraine. He holds all of these entities, shall we say, in contempt. He's now doing what he's doing. And everything you've talked about so far this morning, Joe, I agree with. This has clearly gone much worse than Putin ever imagined. It's going more slowly on the ground, which is one theater. It's going worse at home with all the economic as well as political pushback. But here's the danger in this, which is all this quote-unquote good news from our perspective is bad news for him. And this then, I think, raises in his mind the need to change. And the most likely thing is not that he sues for peace, that these talks on the border with Belarus are going to somehow have an immediate breakthrough. My hunch is he escalates, not with nuclear. I think nuclear is a bluff. It's a way to intimidate. But I can imagine him doing a couple of things very quickly. One is introducing more forces. Two is opening up the Belarus front. And third, and probably most, doing what he did in Syria. Using munitions that are essentially conventional terror weapons, these so-called thermobaric bombs that put fuel in the air before an explosion and kill all sorts of innocent people indiscriminately. He basically commits war crimes every day in Syria. My hunch is he's going to be tempted to do it in Ukraine. So I think we have to be prepared for that.
Okay, so there we go. That's the president of the Council of Foreign Relations saying this is what you can expect if you want to rah, long live Ukraine.
Well, that's essentially
that's what's on order.
That's essentially what he's been doing. But again, you can make this argument a bit. That's an argument against ever defending yourself against an aggressor. Like what you're saying is neither here nor there. Unless you're arguing, you should always just lay down.
Well, not always just lay down. I think Hitler on the march. Yeah,
So
that's a guy with genocidal ambitions.
The
obviously a
Ukrainians
megalomaniac.
So anytime a country wants to assert its authority over another with force of arms, the country is morally obligated to lay down and accept it. That's where that argument goes.
I don't think that's where that argument goes.
Sure,
I don't think that's where that argument goes.
As long as they're not, with the proviso, as long as they're not Hitler, as long as they don't have, as long as they're not Hitler, as long as they don't have genocidal intent, then you should lay down and let them take over your country.
Well, this is a world of big fish and little fish. I'm sorry. This is a world of big fish and little fish, and Ukraine is a little fish. And just as we eat little fish that bother us, they're getting pushed around by a gangster and a thug. And are we gonna? Is that what he just said there? Is that what we want to escalate and escalate and escalate over Ukraine? When, as you said, it was promised that NATO wasn't supposed to go this far east anyway. I mean, I'm sorry. This ain't a hand I want to play. It's not a hand I want to play. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, you're going. I mean, we're past. Okay, we won't join NATO. We're past that now.
Well, no, I don't think you necessarily have to be past that now. I don't think you necessarily have to be past that now.
Well, in terms of the Russians, they're not going to go, oh, okay, and then they're going to leave.
Well, then, I think that's a situation.
We're beyond that.
Well, let's say if we're beyond that, then I think that's a situation we put ourselves in. I'm not risking World War III.
That I agree with.
Okay, so then Ukraine goes to the fucking. I mean, what? What are you going to do? You're going to have a nuclear annihilation over there. You're going to risk that? Richard Haass says, I don't think that's on the table. I don't think so. When it comes to a nuclear exchange, I don't think so is not exactly good enough for me. No, this is not worth a world war. Absolutely not. Not even close.
And that's why we're not there. But you're talking about what the Ukrainians should do. We're not enforcing a no-fly zone. I mean, you're making an argument against some voices that are saying we should go and impose a no-fly zone, which essentially does put us into a shooting war with Russia.
No, but Russell,
this is their country. You're saying,
but in order for them to win, that's going to have to happen. They're not going to be able to stave off the Russian army without that outside help.
They're getting outside help in the form of weapons and munitions, but
they're not going to be able to.
We're not going to physically commit troops. We're not putting boots on the ground.
And so, without any of that,
not the U.S. I'd be very surprised if any of the European countries do.
Okay, but absent any of that, how are they supposed to actually win? I mean, that's what Hillary herself said. They're almost certainly not going to win.
They probably will not.
Okay, so if they don't win, then what are we talking about? That's what Corbyn said. Look, wars have political solutions. You could either work out something now, you could either surrender now or surrender in a few months or a year when God knows how many people are murdered. I don't see an argument to drag this out. Unless you're going to actually try and beat them. But if you're actually going to try and beat them, now you're risking a potential extinction level event for whatever country is on the receiving end of the full force of the Russian military. And that's not something I'm willing to risk. I'm sorry.
They're trying to beat them because they're hoping that the sanctions are so, I mean, I would imagine that they're hoping that the sanctions are so crippling and destabilizing that there's only so long that Putin can sustain this, which I think they're right about. Like his own oligarchs are going to turn on him. They're not going to put up with this.
It's then a question of how much blood you're willing to spill over it. That's the question.
Well,
that's the question.
I think that's easy to say when it's not your country.
But it's also easy to say good for them when it's not your country. It's also easy to say, okay, good for you. We applaud you. And like I just said, they're inviting anyone who wants to come join them to come join them.
Well, so,
yes. if you want to subject the people of Ukraine to bombings,
we should get tougher on Russia. During every hardcore Russiagator, every foaming at the mouth person who was accusing everyone who disagreed with them of being a Putin puppet for 4 fucking years. Yes, I think all those people should be on the front line right now. And I was saying it then. I was saying then. You want to? Are you guys going to the recruitment office if actual war breaks out with Russia? But that's a separate point. I think in the end, Putin escalated it to this level of actually invading this country.
Look, if I'm
look at the end of the day, and this long predates the Soviet Union. Russia is the big asshole of the neighborhood that has been bullying all of the neighbors for years, decades, centuries, and they don't want any part of Russia. There is long. If you talk to people from these countries, they fucking hate Russia. You talk to people from Poland, you talk to people from Lithuania, from Estonia, they fucking hate Russia. This is centuries of the Russians abusing them and forcing them into their Russian Empire and then into their Soviet Union. They fucking hate Russia. So yes, there is the question, it's realpolitik versus moral principles, really. When we argue, well, we never should have expanded NATO, we never should have threatened Russia that way, which is my view. That's realpolitik. When you're talking about, do these countries have a right to choose their own alliances? Yeah, sure, in theory. That doesn't mean on our side that we needed to encourage that because of where we are now.
Well, sure. Yeah, sure. Yes. That I would say is a good point. And maybe we should wrap on that note. What do you think?
See, we don't always agree.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, cool. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you like us, hit the subscribe button. It's either this way or this way. I don't know. I could never tell because of the whole webcam mirror image recording thing. If you really like us, you could support us at Patreon or Substack. The links are in the description. If you don't like us, try watching another one of our videos. You might like that one a little better. If after that you still don't like us, perhaps it just wasn't meant to be.